Section 36 of The Crime of Sylvestre Bonnard by Anatole France. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. September 20. It is done. They are betrothed. Gélie, who is an orphan, as Jean is, did not make his proposal to me in person. He got one of his professors, an old colleague of mine, highly esteemed for his learning and character, to come to me on his behalf. But what a love messenger! Great heavens! A bear? Near a bear of the Pyrenees? But a literary bear, and this latter variety of bear is much more ferocious than the former. Right or wrong? In my opinion, wrong. Gélie says that he does not want any dowry. He takes your ward with nothing but her chemise. Say yes, and the thing is settled. Make haste about it. I want to show you 2 or 3 very curious old tokens from Lorraine, which I'm sure you never saw before. That is literally what he said to me. I answered him that I would consult Jean, and I found no small pleasure in telling him that my ward had a dowry. Her dowry, there it is in front of me. It is my library. Henri and Jean have not even the faintest suspicion about it, and the fact is I am commonly believed to be much richer than I am. I have the face of an old miser. It is certainly a lying face, but its untruthfulness has often won for me a great deal of consideration. There is nobody so much respected in this world as a stingy rich man. I have consulted Jean, but what was the need of listening for her answer? It is done. They are betrothed. It would ill become my character as well as my face to watch these young people any longer, for the mere purpose of noting down their words and gestures. Noli me tangere. That is the maxim for all charming love affairs. I know my duty. It is to respect all the little secrets of that innocent soul entrusted to me. Let these children love each other all they can. Never a word of their fervent outpouring of mutual confidences, never a hint of their artless self-betrayals will be set down in this diary by the old guardian whose authority was so gentle and so brief. At all events, I am not going to remain with my arms folded, and if they have their business to attend to, I have mine also. I am preparing a catalogue of my books, with a view to having them all sold at auction. It is a task which saddens and amuses me at the same time. I linger over it perhaps a good deal longer than I ought to do, turning the leaves of all those works which have become so familiar to my thought, to my touch, to my sight, even out of all necessity and reason. But it is a farewell, and it has ever been in the nature of man to prolong a farewell. This ponderous volume here, which has served me so much for 30 long years, how can I leave it without according it every kindness that a faithful servant deserves? And this one again, which has so often consoled me by its wholesome doctrines, must I not bow down before it for the last time, as to a master? But each time that I meet with a volume which led me into error, which ever afflicted me with false dates, omissions, lies, and other plagues of the archaeologist, I say to it with bitter joy, Go, impostor, traitor, false witness, flee thou far away from me forever, vade retro, all absurdly covered with gold as thou art, and I pray it may befall thee, thanks to thy usurped reputation and thy comely Morocco attire, to take thy place in the cabinet of some banker bibliomaniac, whom thou wilt never be able to seduce as thou hast seduced me, because he will never read one single line of thee. I laid aside some books I must always keep, those books which were given to me as souvenirs. As I placed among them the manuscript of the Golden Legend, I could not but kiss it in memory of Madame Trepoff, who remained grateful to me in spite of her high position and all her wealth, and who became my benefactress merely to prove to me that she felt I had once done her a kindness. Thus I had made a reserve. It was then that for the first time I felt myself inclined to commit a deliberate crime. All through that night I was strongly tempted. By morning the temptation had become irresistible. Everybody else in the house was still asleep. I got out of bed and stole softly from my room. Ye powers of darkness, ye phantoms of the night, if while lingering within my home after the crowing of the cock you saw me stealing about on tiptoe in the city of books, you certainly never cried out, as Madame Trepoff did at Naples, "That old man has a good-natured round back." I entered the library. Hannibal, with his tail perpendicularly erected, came to rub himself against my legs and purr. I seized a volume from its shelf, some venerable Gothic text or some noble poet of the Renaissance, the jewel, the treasure, which I've been dreaming about all night. I seized it and slipped it away into the very bottom of the closet, which I had reserved for those books I intended to retain, and which soon became full almost to bursting. It is horrible to relate. I was stealing from the dowry of Jean, and when the crime had been consummated, I set myself again sturdily to the task of cataloguing, until Jean came to consult me in regard to something about a dress or a trousseau. I could not possibly understand just what she was talking about, through my total ignorance of the current vocabulary of dressmaking and linen drapery. Ah, if a bride of the 14th century had come to talk to me about the apparel of her epoch, then indeed I should have been able to understand her language. But Jean does not belong to my time, and I have to send her to Madame de Gabry, who on this important occasion will take the place of her mother. Night is come. Leaning from the window, we gaze at the vast sombre stretch of the city below us, pierced with multitudinous points of light. Jean presses her hand to her forehead as she leans upon the window bar, and seems a little sad, and I say to myself as I watch her, all changes, even the most longed for, have their melancholy, for what we leave behind us is a part of ourselves. We must die to one life before we can enter into another. And as if answering my thought, the young girl murmurs to me, "My guardian, I am so happy," and still I feel as if I wanted to cry. End of section 36. Section 37 of The Crime of Sylvestre Bonnard by Anatole France. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The last page, August 21, 1869. Page 87. Only 20 lines more, and I shall have finished my book about insects and flowers. Page 87th and last. As we have already seen, the visits of insects are of the utmost importance to plants, since their duty is to carry to the pistils the pollen of the stamens. It seems also that the flower itself is arranged and made attractive for the purpose of inviting this nuptial visit. I think I have been able to show that the nectary of the plant distills a sugary liquid which attracts the insects and obliges it to aid unconsciously in the work of direct or cross fertilization. The last method of fertilization is the more common. I have shown that flowers are colored and perfumed so as to attract insects, and interiorly so constructed as to offer those visitors such a mode of access that they cannot penetrate into the corolla without depositing upon the stigma the pollen with which they have been covered. My most venerated master Sprengel observes, in regard to that fine down which lines the corolla of the wood geranium, "The wise author of nature has never created a single useless hair." I say in my turn, if that lily of the valley, whereof the gospel makes mention, is more richly clad than King Solomon in all his glory, its mantle of purple is a wedding garment, and that rich apparel is necessary to the perpetuation of the species. Broles, August 21, 1869. Monsieur Sylvestre Bonnard was not aware that several very illustrious naturalists were making researches at the same time as he in regard to the relation between insects and plants. He was not acquainted with the labors of Darwin, with those of Dr. Hermann Müller, nor with the observations of Sir John Lubbock. It is worthy of note that the conclusions of Monsieur Sylvestre Bonnard are very nearly similar to those reached by the three scientists above mentioned. Less important, but perhaps equally interesting, is the fact that Sir John Lubbock is, like Monsieur Bonnard, an archaeologist who began to devote himself only late in life to the natural sciences. Note by the French editor. Broles. My house is the last one you pass in the single street of the village as you go to the woods. It is a gabled house with a slate roof which takes iridescent tints in the sun like a pigeon's breast. The weather vane above that roof has one more consideration for me among the country people than all my works upon history and philology. There is not a single child who does not know Monsieur Bonnard's weather vane. It is rusty and squeaks very sharply in the wind. Sometimes it refuses to do any work at all, just like Thérèse, who now allows herself to be assisted by a young peasant girl, though she grumbles a good deal about it. The house is not large, but I am very comfortable in it. My room has 2 windows and gets the sun in the morning. The children's room is upstairs. Jean and Henri come twice a year to occupy it. Little Sylvestre's cradle used to be in it. He was a very pretty child, but very pale. When he used to play on the grass, his mother would watch him very anxiously, and every little while she would stop her sewing in order to take him upon her lap. The poor little fellow never wanted to go to sleep. He used to say that when he was asleep he would go away, very far away, to some place where it was all dark and where he saw things that made him afraid, things he never wanted to see again. Then his mother would call me, and I would sit down beside his cradle. He would take one of my fingers in his little dry, warm hand and say to me, "Godfather, you must tell me a story." Then I would tell him all kinds of stories, which he would listen to very seriously. They all interested him, but there was one especially which filled his little soul with delight. It was the blue bird. Whenever I finished that, he would say to me, "Tell it again, tell it again." And I would tell it again until his little pale, blue-veined head sank back upon the pillow in slumber. The doctor used to answer all our questions by saying, "There's nothing extraordinary the matter with him." No, there was nothing extraordinary the matter with little Sylvestre. One evening last year his father called me. "Come," he said, "the little one is still worse." I approached the cradle over which the mother hung motionless, as if tied down above it by all the powers of her soul. Little Sylvestre turned his eyes towards me. Their pupils had already rolled up beneath his eyelids and could not descend again. "Godfather," he said, "you are not to tell me any more stories." No, I was not to tell him any more stories. Poor Jean, poor mother. I'm too old now to feel very deeply, but how strangely painful a mystery is the death of a child. Today the father and mother have come to pass 6 weeks under the old man's roof. I see them now returning from the woods, walking arm in arm. Jean is closely wrapped in her black shawl, and Henri wears a crape band on his straw hat, but they are both of them radiant with youth, and they smile very sweetly at each other. They smile at the earth which sustains them. They smile at the air which bathes them. They smile at the light which each one sees in the eyes of the other. From my window I wave my handkerchief at them, and they smile at my old age. Jean comes running lightly up the stairs. She kisses me, and then whispers in my ear something which I divine rather than hear, and I make answer to her, "May God's blessing be with you, Jean, and with your husband, and with your children, and with your children's children forever. Et nunc dimittis servum tuum, Domine." End of section 37. End of The Crime of Sylvestre Bonnard by Anatole France.